What if I told you that the most terrifying monsters in history didn't hide in shadows or come from your nightmares? They wore suits. They carried government IDs. They worked in ordinary office buildings. They had budgets, signed approvals, and operated with the full knowledge of people at the very top. And they conducted experiments on human beings so disturbing, so morally corrupt, that they buried the evidence for decades. Some of these programs were only discovered because a single document survived destruction by accident. A misfiled box. A historian who asked the wrong question. A whistleblower who couldn't live with the silence anymore. And the most terrifying part? Not one of the people who designed and ran these experiments ever spent a single day in prison. Tonight, we open 5 classified files. 5 programs so hidden from the public that even knowing about them now, years, sometimes decades later, should make you deeply uncomfortable. Because if they did this when we weren't watching, what else is in those files we haven't found yet? Let's begin. Number 5. MKUltra, 1953. The Cold War is at its peak, and the CIA is terrified of one thing above everything else: that the Soviet Union has found a way to control the human mind. So they decide to find one first. Project MKUltra is born. Its mission: to develop techniques for breaking down the human psyche using LSD, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, electroconvulsive shock, and prolonged psychological torture, all dressed up as scientific research. The test subjects included mental hospital patients who trusted their doctors, soldiers who trusted their government, prisoners who had no choice at all. None of them knew what was being done to them. One government scientist, a man named Frank Olson, was secretly dosed with LSD at a CIA retreat. 9 days later, he fell from the window of a New York hotel room on the 13th floor. The CIA called it a suicide. Frank Olson's son has spent his entire adult life trying to prove it was murder. When CIA Director Richard Helms shut down MKUltra in 1973, he ordered every single document destroyed. They shredded files for days. They thought they had succeeded. But one box, a single cardboard box, was misfiled in a records facility in Maryland. It contained over 20,000 documents. When those documents were discovered by accident in 1977, they confirmed what many had suspected and what the government had denied for over 2 decades. The CIA had experimented on its own citizens, deliberately, systematically, and without remorse. Number 4. Operation Sea Spray. September 1950. San Francisco is waking up to an ordinary Tuesday. Parents dropping children at school. Shop owners unlocking doors. Commuters waiting for buses. Nobody notices the United States Navy ship quietly positioned just outside the bay. Nobody notices the equipment being prepared on its deck. And nobody, not one of the 800,000 people living in that city, knows that for the next 6 days, the U.S. military is about to spray the entire population with a cloud of live bacteria. The official justification was cold in its logic. The military wanted to simulate a real Soviet biological weapons attack. They needed data. How fast would it spread? Which neighborhoods would be hit hardest? How many would get sick? To get those answers, they used real people, without asking, without warning, without a single word. The bacteria, Serratia marcescens, spread across the entire city within 24 hours. Within days, 11 people arrived at Stanford University Hospital with unusual bacterial infections. One of them, a 75-year-old retired pipe fitter named Edward Nevin, died. His family was told it was a rare and unfortunate illness. They had no idea their government had just used their city as a test chamber. Edward Nevin's grandson would spend years fighting in court to expose the truth. In 1981, a federal judge ruled the government could not be held liable because they had acted within the law, within their authority, within their rights. Spraying a city of nearly 1 million people with live biological agents was perfectly legal. Number 3. 1946. The Nuremberg trials have just established for the entire world that experimenting on human beings without their consent is a crime against humanity. American doctors were paying close attention. Specifically, they were taking notes on how not to get caught. Between 1946 and 1948, a U.S. government-funded program led by Dr. John Cutler deliberately infected over 1,300 people in Guatemala, prisoners, soldiers, psychiatric patients, and orphan children, with syphilis and gonorrhea, without consent, without knowledge, without any intention of telling them. The methods were clinical in their brutality. Infected sex workers were paid to have contact with prisoners. In other cases, doctors applied bacteria directly to open skin abrasions, through the eyes, through spinal injections. The stated goal was to test whether penicillin could prevent infection after exposure. That was the scientific justification. That was how they wrote it up in their reports. That was how they slept at night. The program ended in 1948, and the files were classified, sealed, and forgotten for 62 years. A medical historian named Dr. Susan Reverby uncovered the truth in 2010. Completely by accident, while researching an unrelated paper at a university in Pittsburgh. President Obama called the president of Guatemala personally to apologize. Dr. John Cutler, the man who ran the program, had died in 2003. He was never charged, never tried, never held accountable. He had even received a public health commendation from the U.S. government for his contributions to medicine number 2, Project SHAD. Ship-aboard Hazard and Defense, the 1960s. The U.S. military needs to understand how its ships would hold up against a biological or chemical weapon attack. A reasonable concern, an unreasonable solution. Across dozens of classified tests, on ships in the Pacific, the Atlantic, and the Gulf, the Pentagon deliberately exposed its own sailors and soldiers to nerve agents, biological agents, and toxic chemical simulants, without informed consent, without medical monitoring, without any plan to follow up. These men came home. They raised families. They showed up at VA offices with joint pain, nerve damage, mysterious cancers, and lung conditions that had no explanation. When they asked what had been done to them during their service, they were handed a form letter. The tests, the letter said, had never taken place. For 35 years, these men were told their memories were wrong, that the illnesses destroying their bodies had nothing to do with their service. Project SHAD was officially acknowledged by the Department of Defense in 2002, 39 years after the tests began. A Department of Defense spokesperson called it regrettable. Hundreds of the veterans involved had already died, still waiting for someone to use that word. And number 1, the one with no defense strategy, no Cold War justification, no national security excuse. In 1939, a speech researcher at the University of Iowa named Wendell Johnson had a theory. He believed stuttering was not a natural condition. He believed it was caused by environment, by how adults responded to imperfect speech in children. To test his theory, he needed children. Specifically, children who had no parents to ask questions, no family to protect them. So he went to a state-run orphanage in Davenport, Iowa, and selected 22 children. Half received normal positive speech therapy. The other half, children with perfectly normal speech, were deliberately told they were broken. Every single day, researchers interrupted them, corrected them, belittled them, told them they stuttered, told them something was fundamentally wrong with them, told them they would never speak correctly. Several of those children developed real speech disorders that followed them for the rest of their lives. Some never fully recovered. The university buried the research for over 60 years, because, as one official later admitted, they were ashamed. When the story was finally published in 2001 by the San Jose Mercury News, the research community gave the study the only name that fit: the Monster Study. Wendell Johnson died in 1959. The children he experimented on grew up, grew old, and carried what he did to them for every single day of the rest of their lives. 5 experiments. 5 times the people sworn to protect us looked at human beings and saw raw material instead. 5 times they made a calculated decision that the truth could be buried indefinitely. And 5 times, only because someone stumbled across a document, asked the wrong question, or refused to stay silent, we found out. Here's the question that should keep you awake tonight. How many experiments never had that one surviving document? How many never had that one historian who asked the right question? How many are still in those filing cabinets, you waiting? Subscribe to Chase, because this is what we do here. We go where others won't.